I bought the lake house to disappear, to wake up to water and silence after burying my wife and working my whole life without rest. I didn't raise my voice when my nephew later told me he'd turn my home into a rental and that I could sleep in the back room when guests weren't there. I didn't argue. I let him believe he'd won, while I quietly prepared the moment that would end everything he thought he owned. And before I tell you how that moment came together, stay with me and let me know where you're listening from. Stories like this only reach the people who need them when listeners choose not to look away. The real estate office in Port Holloway smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner. Rain streaked the tall windows, blurring the harbor beyond. The agent's pen scratched steadily as she signed the final page, then slid the folder across the desk toward me. "Congratulations, Mr. Hale," she said. "Lake Rowan doesn't change people often, but when it does it gently." I nodded and closed my hand around the keys. $408,000. That was the number. 36 years of loading docks, night shifts, missed holidays, and overtime I didn't need but accept it because going home to an empty house hurt more than exhaustion. Every dollar I'd saved after my wife passed went into this place, not as an investment, not as a legacy, but as an ending, or so I thought. The drive took just under an hour. Asphalt narrowed into gravel. Forest closed in. When the trees finally opened, the lake appeared like a hell breath, flat, gray, endless. The cottage sat 50 feet from the water, weathered cedar, one level, quiet in a way that felt earned. No neighbors close enough to hear you think. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. Simple, honest. One main room with a small kitchen, a wood stove, a bedroom barely large enough for a bed and dresser. Windows everywhere, all of them facing the lake. I stood there for a long time, keys still in my hand. That first week, I moved in slowly, like rushing might break something. The leather chair went where the sunrise hit first. Books lined the shelf the way my wife used to tease me about. Nonfiction first, then novels, spines aligned. Her photograph went on the mantel, angled so the morning light touched it. Mornings became sacred. I woke before dawn, made coffee, and sat on the deck wrapped in an old jacket, while the lake shifted from black to gray to gold. A great blue heron visited often, standing motionless in the shallows like it had nowhere else to be. That was when I called my sister, Ruth. "You really did it," she said warmly. "I'm proud of you." "I needed quiet," I replied. "This place gives it." "I'm glad," she said. "After everything, you deserve peace." There was a pause, just long enough to notice. "My son's been asking about the place," she added lightly. "Evan's been getting into property investing." The word investing landed wrong. "Oh," I said. "He's ambitious. Might want to come see it sometime." "He can," I replied. "Just call first." That night, the lake stayed calm, but something inside me didn't. 2 weeks later, Evan called. "Uncle Caleb," he said smoothly, "I've been running numbers." I leaned against the deck railing, watching the heron lift into the air. "I'm listening. Your place is perfect for short-term rentals. Waterfront. Private. You could clear $5,000 a month in peak season. Easy." "I didn't buy it to rent," I said. "Of course not," he replied quickly. "But hear me out. I handle everything. Bookings, cleaning, guests. You still get to stay there when it's empty. The back room's more than enough for you." My grip tightened on the phone. "My back room. Think of it as passive income," he said. "You're retired. This is smart." "No," I said calmly. "This is my home." Silence. Then his voice cooled. "You're being emotional. What if you need money later? Medical bills? This is security." "I didn't ask for security," I said. "I asked for peace." "We'll talk again," he replied, and hung up. 3 days later, Ruth called. "He's upset," she said. "You shut him down without even considering it. He tried to take over my house. He's trying to help." I said no. "You've changed," she said quietly. "Yes," I replied. "I finally have something worth protecting." After that, things went quiet again. Too quiet, until one Tuesday morning in November. when I drove into town for supplies and saw a poster taped to a cafe window. Stunning lakefront retreat. Book your escape today. It was my deck, my view, my trees, my cottage. I went cold. I pulled out my phone and typed in the website printed at the bottom. Lake Rowan Getaways. Professional design. High-resolution photos. Some taken through my windows. A booking calendar. Rates listed. 3 reservations already confirmed. My house wasn't just being discussed anymore. It was being sold. And my nephew had already taken money. I drove home carefully, forcing myself not to speed. When I reached the cottage, I checked every door and window. Locked. Undisturbed. But that didn't mean untouched. That night, I sat by the wood stove, staring at the fire, thinking about every conversation, every assumption, every boundary Evan had stepped over because he believed age made people pliable. I didn't call him. I didn't warn him. I called a lawyer, and then I installed cameras. By the time Evan finally showed up with his first paying guests, confident, smiling, keys in hand, he had no idea the quiet old man he thought he could sideline had already turned the situation inside out. This was only the beginning. I slept poorly that night, not because I was afraid, but because my mind wouldn't slow down. Grief, I understood. Loneliness, too. Betrayal from blood, that was different. That sat in the chest like a weight that refused to settle. At first light, I made coffee and sat on the deck as usual. The lake was calm, almost indifferent. The heron was already there, standing in the shallows, patient as ever. I envied that. Animals didn't negotiate boundaries. They didn't explain themselves. They simply existed where they were meant to. By mid-morning, the lawyer called back. His name was Andrew Pike. Property law. Measured voice. No wasted words. "Mr. Hale," he said, after I explained everything slowly and precisely. "What your nephew is doing is not a gray area. Listing your property without consent, taking money, advertising it as his. This is fraud." The word landed cleanly. Heavy but clean. "I don't want drama," I said. "I want it stopped." "Stopping it is easy," he replied. "What matters is how far you want to take it." We discussed options. Cease and desist. Injunction. Restitution. Criminal complaint if necessary. How fast? I asked. "I can draft paperwork today," he said. "But I need evidence. Screenshots. Dates. Anything you remember him saying." I hung up and opened my notebook. The same habit I'd had for decades at work. Document everything. I wrote down Evan's words as accurately as I could remember. Dates. Times. His phrase about the back room. His assumption that my home was already his to manage. By noon, I had a folder full of screenshots. The website. The booking calendar. The rates. The email address tied to the listing. I sent everything to Andrew. Then I did something else. I went into town and bought a security system. 3 cameras. 1 facing the driveway. 1 covering the deck. 1 angled toward the back of the cottage. Motion activated. Cloud storage. No blind spots. The installer raised an eyebrow when I told him where to place them. "Expecting trouble?" he asked. "Company," I replied. That evening, Andrew emailed the cease and desist letter. Clear, direct, unforgiving. It demanded the immediate removal of the listing, cancellation of all bookings, and full refunds. It gave Evan 24 hours. I knew he wouldn't comply. At 9:38 p.m., my phone buzzed. "Evan, you really went to a lawyer?" he snapped, skipping pleasantries. "You rented my house," I said, "without permission." "I was finalizing the plan," he argued. "You overreacted. You ignored my answer." "Your family," he said. "You don't threaten family." "I don't steal from them either." Silence. Then a laugh. Short, disbelieving. "You won't follow through," he said. "You don't have it in you." "Take the site down," I replied. "Refund the money." "You're blowing this up for no reason," he said. "Think about how this looks." "I have," I said. "Good night." The website stayed up. The next morning, I woke early and checked the cameras out of habit. At 6:14 a.m., motion alert. Evan's car pulled into my driveway. He got out slowly, looking around like the place already belonged to him. He walked the perimeter, tried the front door, then the deck. All locked. He stood there for a long moment, hands on his hips, staring through the windows. I watched him on my phone while drinking coffee. He didn't knock. He left. I sent the footage to Andrew. By noon, Andrew called back. "That helps," he said. "A lot." That afternoon, a constable arrived. Calm, professional, asked questions, took notes, watched the footage twice. "If he shows up again," she said, "don't engage. Call us." The following day was the one that mattered. At exactly 5:47 p.m., headlights appeared on the driveway camera. Evan's car. Behind it, another vehicle, out-of-province plates. A couple stepped out, smiling, luggage in hand. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. Uncle Caleb. Evan said brightly, "We're here. Guests are checking in. Open up." I didn't move. He knocked. Harder this time. "Caleb," he called. "Don't do this." These people paid. The couple exchanged confused looks. The woman asked something I couldn't hear. Evan gestured broadly, pointing at the lake, selling the dream. I called the constable. She arrived in under 15 minutes. From a window, I watched everything. Her conversation with Evan was calm, but firm. She showed him documents. The couple's expression shifted from confusion to anger. They left quickly, tires crunching gravel. Evan argued, gestured, pointed at the house, at the lake, at the injustice he believed was being done to him. The constable handed him paperwork. He read it. His face changed. When he finally drove away, the lake returned to silence. The constable knocked once. "It's official," she said. "He's under investigation. He's been ordered to cease all activity related to your property." I thanked her and closed the door. That night, the cottage felt heavier than before. Not unsafe, just honest. Consequences have weight. My sister called an hour later. "You called the police," she said, voice shaking. "He left me no choice. He's your nephew, and this is my home." "You've ruined him," she said. "No," I replied. "He ruined himself." She hung up. I sat on the deck long after dark, the lake barely visible, the heron gone for the night. I thought about my wife, how she used to say that kindness without boundaries wasn't kindness at all. I didn't feel victorious. I felt finished with pretending. And as the cold crept in and the house settled around me, one thing became clear. Evan thought this was about money. He still didn't understand. It was about ownership. The investigation didn't move loudly. It moved deliberately. That suited me. Days passed without Evan calling. The website vanished sometime overnight. No apology, no explanation. Just gone. I assumed that meant he'd finally understood the seriousness of what he'd done. I was wrong. Andrew called on a Thursday afternoon while I was repairing a loose board on the deck. "He's complied partially," Andrew said, "but not fully." "What does that mean?" I asked. "He took the listing down, but he hasn't refunded everyone. 2 payments are still unaccounted for. One is substantial." I closed my eyes. How substantial? Almost $9,000. I sat down slowly. "So he took the money and ran," I said. "Which escalates things," Andrew replied. "From civil misuse into clear criminal territory." I thought about the couple who'd shown up with suitcases and smiles, about how embarrassed they'd looked, how angry, how helpless. "Do what you need to do," I said. Andrew didn't hesitate. "Understood." The constable returned the next morning, this time with a different energy. Still calm but purposeful. "We're expanding the scope," she said. "Your nephew has been contacted. He's been instructed to appear for questioning." "When?" I asked. "This afternoon." I nodded. After she left, I made tea and sat by the window. The lake was restless that day. Wind pushed small waves against the shore, choppy and impatient. It felt appropriate. Evan showed up again that evening. Alone. The camera alert went off just after sunset. I watched him pull into the driveway. Slower this time. No confidence in his movements. No phone to his ear. He sat in the car for nearly a full minute before stepping out. He walked to the deck and knocked. Once. Caleb, he called. Not uncle this time. Just my name. I stayed where I was. Please, he said. We need to talk. I didn't answer. He knocked again, harder. I didn't mean for it to go this far, he said, voice tight. You didn't have to involve police. I stood, but I didn't open the door. You involved them, I said through the glass. When you ignored me. He exhaled sharply. I was fixing things. You were covering tracks. He laughed once. Bitter. You think this makes you the hero? I think it makes me the owner, I replied. Silence. I need time, he said. I'll pay it back. You should talk to your lawyer, I said. Not me. You always liked rules, he snapped. Mom says you're rigid. Your mother isn't here, I said, and neither is my patience. He stood there for a moment longer, then turned and left. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. The next day, Andrew called again. He didn't show, he said. For questioning? No. I closed my eyes. What now? A warrant, Andrew replied. And that changes everything. It took less than a week for the story to reach my sister. She came in person this time. Her car pulled into the driveway on a gray afternoon, tires crunching gravel like an accusation. She looked smaller than I remembered. Tired, angry, afraid. You're destroying him, she said the moment she stepped inside. He did that. I replied calmly. He made a mistake. He committed fraud. She shook her head. You're being cold. I'm being precise. She sat heavily at the kitchen table. The same table Evan had once spread spreadsheets across like a claim. You could have handled this quietly, she said. I tried. You could have compromised. I said no. You could have forgiven him. For what? I asked. For assuming I'd shrink to fit his plans? Her eyes filled. He's scared. So were those guests. I replied. So was I. She didn't respond. We sat in silence, the lake visible through the windows, restless and gray. He's facing charges, she said finally. Yes. He could lose everything. So could I said, if I let him. She looked around the cottage properly then. The books, the chair, my wife's photograph on the mantel. She would have wanted peace, Ruth said quietly. She would have wanted respect. I replied. That was the moment something shifted. She didn't apologize, but she didn't argue again either. When she left, she hugged me awkwardly, like she wasn't sure which side of the line she was on. Winter came early that year. Frost edged the deck boards. The lake darkened. The herons still came, patient as ever. Andrew kept me updated. Evan had finally appeared. With a lawyer, he claimed misunderstanding, poor communication, family dispute. None of it held. The evidence was clean. The bookings, the payments, the footage, the ignored cease and desist. This won't go away, Andrew told me, even if he wants it to. I know, I said. One evening, as snow began to fall lightly over the water, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You didn't have to do this. I stared at the screen. Then I deleted it, because by then I understood something Evan never would. This wasn't punishment. It was consequence. And consequences don't ask permission. By the time December settled in fully, the cottage no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a boundary I was actively defending. Snow fell in thin, quiet sheets, muting the world. The lake darkened early each afternoon, the water turning steel gray by 4 o'clock. I kept busy with small repairs, not because they were urgent, but because movement kept my thoughts from spiraling. Andrew called every few days, never with drama, just updates. Crown Counsel is reviewing the file, he told me one morning. They're treating it seriously. Meaning? I asked. Meaning your nephew's argument that this was a family misunderstanding isn't working. I wasn't surprised. Evidence doesn't care about intentions people invent after the fact. A week later, the constable returned. Same calm demeanor, but this time she brought paperwork. Mr. Hale, she said, sitting at the kitchen table. Charges are being approved. Fraud over 5,000. I exhaled slowly. I'd known it was coming, but knowing and hearing it aloud were different things. What happens next? I asked. He'll be formally charged, she replied. There will likely be a court date in the new year. He may be offered a plea option, depending on prior history. And the money? I asked. Restitution will be part of it. After she left, the cottage felt unusually quiet. Even the stove crackled softly, as if it were being careful not to intrude. That night, I dreamed of my wife. She stood on the deck, wrapped in the old sweater she loved, watching the sunrise. When she turned to me, she didn't smile. She just said, "You finally stopped shrinking." I woke before dawn and couldn't fall back asleep. 2 days later, my sister called again. This time, her voice was different. Less anger, more fear. "He's been charged," she said. "Yes," I replied. "They're saying it's serious." "It is. He could end up with a record," she said. "This will follow him." "So what he did," I answered. There was a long pause. "I raise him better than this," she said quietly. "I believe you," I replied. And I meant it. But belief doesn't undo choices. She came to visit again the following weekend. She didn't bring accusations this time. She brought exhaustion. We sat by the stove, tea growing cold between us. "He thought you'd cave," she admitted. "He told me you always gave in eventually." That stung more than I expected. "I used to," I said. "I won't anymore." She nodded slowly. "I see that now." She looked around again, taking in the cottage with different eyes. "This place matters to you," she said. "Yes." "More than we realized." "Yes." When she left, she didn't slam the door. Progress, I thought, came in strange shapes. Christmas came quietly. I cooked for one. Simple food. No decorations. No noise. The lake froze at the edges, thin ice forming delicate patterns that broke by midday. The heron disappeared for several days, then returned as if nothing had changed. I admired that. Andrew called just before New Year's. "He's taking a deal," he said. I leaned back in the chair. "Terms?" I asked. "Probation. Restitution. Conditional discharge if he complies fully. No jail time for now." I closed my eyes briefly. "That's fair," I said. "It's more than fair," Andrew replied. "It's generous." Generous wasn't the word I would have chosen. But justice isn't about what feels satisfying. It's about what holds. The deal required Evan to repay every dollar, plus penalties. He was barred from any property management or rental activity for years. Any violation would trigger harsher consequences. He would carry the weight of this choice long after the headlines, if there ever were any, faded. A few days later, a letter arrived, handwritten, from Evan. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit on the table for a full hour, just looking at my name written in his careful, familiar handwriting. When I finally opened it, the words inside were not what I expected. No rage, no excuses, just fear. He wrote about pressure, about debt, about wanting to prove something, about assuming I'd never truly say no. He apologized. Not fully, but honestly enough that I believed he felt something. He asked, carefully, almost timidly, if there was any chance we could speak someday. I folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. I didn't respond. Not yet, because forgiveness is not the same as access. Winter deepened. Life slowed. The legal process moved on its tracks without me needing to push anymore. The cameras stayed up, but they stopped alerting. No more surprise visits. No more confrontations. The cottage returned to what was meant to be. One quiet morning in January, I stood on the deck with my coffee and watched the sunrise spill pale gold across the frozen inlet. The heron stood in the shallows again, perfectly still. For the first time in months, my chest felt light. Not because everything was fixed, but because nothing was being taken from me anymore. And as the light crept higher and the world woke slowly around me, I understood something clearly. Standing your ground doesn't make you cruel. It just tells the truth about where you end. By February, the quiet returned in a way that felt earned rather than fragile. The legal machinery kept moving in the background, but it no longer dominated my days. Andrew handled filings. The Crown handled timelines. I stopped checking my phone every hour. Stopped listening for cars on the gravel. Stopped bracing. That alone told me something had changed. Evan's deal was formalized mid-month. Probation. Mandatory restitution. Strict conditions. No contact with me unless I agreed. No involvement in rentals, property management, or financial dealings connected to real estate. Any violation would void the deal and reopen charges. Paperwork has a way of turning arrogance into reality. Andrew walked me through the details over the phone. His tone was neutral, professional, but I could hear the quiet finality underneath it. This closes the criminal side, he said. Civil restitution will take longer, but it's enforceable. I'm not chasing him, I replied. I just want distance. And you'll have it, he said, legally and practically. After the call, I sat for a long time without moving. The stove hummed. Snow slid off the roof in soft thumps. Somewhere out on the ice, something cracked, sharp and brief. I thought I'd feel relief. Instead, what I felt was clarity. Because when conflict ends, you're left alone with what it cost. The first cost came in the form of silence. My sister didn't call for weeks. No texts. No updates. Nothing. I didn't reach out either. Not because I was angry, but because I was done explaining. Then, one afternoon in late February, her name appeared on my phone. I let it ring once. Twice. Then I answered. Hi, she said. Hi, I replied. A pause stretched between us, weighted but not hostile. I wanted to tell you, she said slowly. Evan moved out. I said nothing. He's staying with a friend, she continued. Vanessa left weeks ago. The house feels empty. I'm sorry, I said and meant it. I didn't come to argue, she added quickly. I came to understand. I waited. He told me he thought you'd fold, she said. That you always did. The words landed again, still sharp, but duller than before. I used to, I said. I know, she replied. And I think I counted on that too. That admission mattered more than any apology she could have offered. I'm not calling to fix things, she continued. I just wanted you to know I see it now. What he did. What I enabled. I exhaled slowly. Thank you, I said. Another pause. Do you hate me? She asked. No, I replied. But things are different. Yes, she said quietly. They are. When we hung up, I felt something loosen. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but honesty. And honesty, I was learning, was often the beginning of peace. March brought longer days. The ice pulled back from the shoreline. The lake breathed again. The heron returned more regularly, as if winter had merely been an inconvenience, not a threat. I started walking farther along the shore, exploring paths I'd ignored before, learning the land instead of hiding inside it. One afternoon, I found myself standing at the far edge of the property line, looking back at the cottage from a distance. It looked small, not insignificant, just human, modest, enough. I realized in how close I'd come to losing not just a place, but the meaning of it. The cottage was an asset. It was a decision to live quietly, to stop negotiating my peace, to choose stillness over approval. That understanding didn't come with fireworks. It came with steadiness. In early April, Andrew called again. Restitution payments have begun, he said. Small amounts, but consistent. That's fine, I replied, as long as it's enforced. It will be, he assured me. And for what it's worth, you handled this exactly right. I smiled faintly. I didn't feel right, I said. I felt firm. That's often the same thing, he replied. A week later, another letter arrived. From Evan. I hesitated longer this time before opening it. This one was different. Less desperate. More grounded. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He didn't ask to visit. He acknowledged plainly that he'd mistaken kindness for weakness and silence for consent. He wrote that the consequences had stripped him down, that probation meetings were humiliating, That restitution was painful. That shame followed him everywhere. "I don't expect anything from you," he wrote. "I just wanted to say I understand now that this wasn't about money. It was about me believing I had a right I never earned." I folded the letter carefully. Then I placed it in the drawer, not as a reminder, as a marker. Spring arrived quietly. The trees budded. The air softened. Mornings stretched. I took down one of the security cameras, the one facing the deck, left the others. Not out of fear, but habit. Boundaries don't need to be dramatic to be effective. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the water caught fire with reflected light, I thought about the version of myself who'd first unlocked that door months earlier. Hopeful, grieving, unguarded. I didn't pity him. I respected him, because he'd chosen peace once. And when it was threatened, he'd chosen himself again. That was the real surprise Evan hadn't planned for. And it was a lesson I intended to keep. By late April, the cottage had fully shifted back into rhythm. Not the fragile calm I clung to in the early days, but a steadier one, earned, tested, and no longer negotiable. I stopped thinking about Evan every day. That surprised me most. Conflict has gravity. While it's happening, it pulls every thought toward it. When it ends, there's a strange vacuum. Space you don't know what to do with until you remember what your life looked like before everything narrowed. I filled that space slowly. Mornings were for the deck again. Coffee in the same mug. Sunrise spilling across the lake in pale layers. Some days the heron appeared. Some days it didn't. I stopped waiting for it like an omen and started seeing it for what it was. Just another creature minding its boundaries. In May, I received official confirmation that the restitution account had been set up properly. Payments were small, structured, automatic. I didn't feel satisfaction seeing the numbers. Only confirmation that the system was doing what it was supposed to do without my involvement. Distance, I learned, is a kind of freedom. Andrew and I spoke less often now. When we did, it was procedural. "You're not required to attend anything further," he told me during one brief call. "Unless he violates terms, this chapter is closed." "Good," I replied, and meant it. The next unexpected moment came from a direction I hadn't considered. A knock. Not sharp, not insistent, just present. I checked the camera first out of habit. My sister, alone. No tension in her posture. No rehearsed expression. Just stillness. I opened the door. She didn't step forward immediately. Didn't ask to come in. She waited, like someone who understood they were approaching a line. "I was nearby," she said. "Thought I'd stop. If that's okay." I stepped aside. She entered slowly, taking the cottage with a different energy than before. Not appraisal. Not guilt. Just quiet observation. "It feels settled," she said. "It is," I replied. We sat at the table. No tea this time. Just water. She clasped her hands, then unclasped them. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said, "about how quickly I rushed to protect him, and how little I listened to you." I didn't interrupt. "I told myself I was being a good mother," she continued. "But really I was being afraid. Afraid of what it would mean if he truly crossed a line." Her voice wavered, just slightly. "I crossed one too," she said. I nodded. Not agreement. Recognition. "I'm not asking you to fix anything," she added quickly. "I just didn't want more silence." "That's fair," I said. She looked at me then. Really looked. "You're different," she said. Calmer. Harder in a good way. I stopped bargaining. I replied. She smiled faintly. "I wish I'd learned that sooner." We talked for nearly an hour. Not about Evan. Not about court. About ordinary things. The weather. The lake. Memories of our childhood that didn't carry weight anymore. When she left, she hugged me. Not desperately. Gratefully. Summer came quietly. The lake warmed. Boats appeared again in the distance. Laughter drifted faintly across the water on weekends. Far enough away not to intrude, close enough to remind me the world was still turning. One afternoon, while replacing a section of dock railing, I noticed a car slow at the edge of the driveway. It didn't turn in. It stopped, then continued on. Later, the camera footage confirmed it. Evan, he didn't get out, didn't approach, just drove past. I watched the clip once, then deleted it. That moment told me more than any letter ever could. He finally understood where he wasn't welcome. In July, a letter arrived from the Crown's office. Formal language, case resolved, conditions ongoing, file closed unless breached. I filed it away without ceremony. That same week, I took down the remaining cameras. Not because I trusted the world, because I trusted myself. Trust, I realize, isn't about believing nothing bad will happen. It's about knowing you'll respond clearly if it does. One evening near the end of summer, I sat on the deck longer than usual. The sun dropped low, setting the lake on fire with copper and gold. The heron stood knee-deep in the water, motionless. I thought about how close I'd come to losing this. Not the property, but the stillness. How easily guilt and obligation could have reshaped my life into something cramped and resentful. I hadn't avoided conflict. I'd walked through it. And on the other side, I hadn't found triumph. I'd found alignment. Later that night, my sister sent a short message. "Thank you for letting me back in," even slowly. I replied just as simply, "Thank you for respecting where I stand." The cottage creaked gently as night settled. Wind moved through the trees. The lake darkened. And for the first time since I'd arrived months earlier, I didn't feel like I was guarding my peace. I was living inside it. Still, some chapters don't close quietly. They wait. And I knew, without fear, without anticipation, that one more test would come. Not to take what was mine, but to see if I still remembered how to say no. And this time, I wouldn't hesitate. September arrived with sharper mornings and softer light, the kind that makes you aware of time without threatening you with it. The cottage breathed differently then. The air carried a hint of cold, and the lake reflected the sky like polished steel. I'd grown used to the quiet, not the absence of sound, but the absence of intrusion. That was why the phone call felt so out of place. A known number. I let it ring. It rang again. I answered on the third ring, not because I was curious, but because I was no longer afraid of hearing things I didn't want to hear. "Mr. Hale?" a woman asked. "Yes." "This is Claire Donnelly. I'm calling from the mediation office downtown. I'm representing your nephew." I didn't respond immediately. "He's not permitted to contact me." I said finally. "He isn't," she replied quickly. "This call is within legal bounds. He asked me to reach out regarding a single matter. You're not obligated to respond." I waited. "He's requesting permission," she continued, choosing her words carefully, "to speak with you once. Supervised. No discussion of finances or property. Just closure." The word hung there. Closure is a dangerous thing. People use it when they want relief without responsibility. "I'll think about it," I said. "That's all he asked," she replied. "Thank you." I hung up and sat there longer than I meant to. Not because I was tempted, but because I was curious about my own reaction. A year ago, I would have agreed immediately, hoping to smooth things over, to prove I was reasonable. Months ago, I would have said no out of anger. Now I simply noticed the request. That evening, I walked the shoreline as the sun set early behind the trees. Leaves had begun to turn, golden at the edges, green retreating slowly. The heron stood farther down the bank than usual, watching the water with that same patient stillness. I realized then that closure wasn't something Evan needed from me. It was something he needed from himself. 2 days later, I called Andrew. "Legally?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "You're under no obligation, and I'd advise caution. But if you do agree, set conditions. Written. Specific." "I wouldn't meet him here," I said. "Good," Andrew replied. "I wouldn't meet him alone." "Better." "And I wouldn't promise anything beyond listening." Andrew paused. That might actually be the healthiest position. I sat with it another night. Then I called Claire back. "One meeting," I said. "Public place. 30 minutes. You present. No discussion of property, money, or the case." She exhaled audibly. "I'll tell him." We met a week later. A cafe near the harbor. Neutral ground. Noise enough to prevent intimacy, but not chaos. I arrived first and chose a table near the window. Evan walked in 5 minutes later. He looked different. Not thinner. Not broken. Just smaller. Less sure of the space he occupied. He didn't approach immediately. He paused, scanning, then saw me and nodded once. We didn't hug. We didn't shake hands. We sat. Claire took the chair beside him. Legal pad ready. Presence firm but unobtrusive. Thank you for agreeing. Evan said quietly. You asked. I replied. That's all. He nodded. For a moment. He seemed unsure where to begin. The old Evan would have filled the silence with charm or justification. This one didn't. I won't waste your time, he said. I just wanted to say, without asking for anything, that I understand what I did wasn't just wrong. It was entitled. I said nothing. I told myself stories, he continued, that you were alone, that you didn't need the space, that you'd eventually thank me. He let out a breath that sounded tired. I never asked what you wanted, he said. I assumed. Yes, I replied simply. That assumption cost me everything I thought I was building, he said. And I know that's not your fault. Silence again. I don't expect forgiveness, he added quickly. I don't expect a relationship. I just didn't want a last thing between us to be court paperwork. I studied him carefully. This was an apology designed to fix things. It was one designed to acknowledge damage. That's fair, I said. He looked up, surprised. I'm not reopening doors, I continued. But I accept that you understand what you did. He nodded slowly. That's more than I deserve. We sat for another minute. Then I stood. That's all the time I have, I said. He stood too. I won't contact you again, he said. Not unless you ask. I know, I replied. We left separately. On the walk back to my car, I felt nothing dramatic. No surge of relief. No anger. Just completion. October deepened. Storms rolled in from the coast, bringing rain that lashed the windows and rattled the roof at night. I welcomed them. There's something comforting about weather that reminds you how small you are. One evening, as rain hammered the lake into silver chaos, my sister called. He told me you met, she said. Yes. Thank you, she added quietly, for giving him that. I didn't give him anything, I replied. I listened. She understood the difference. That month, I took on a small project I'd been putting off, rebuilding the dock ladder. It was tedious work, precise, requiring patience and care. Each bolt tightened correctly. Each plank measured twice. As I worked, I thought about how easy it is to let people redefine your boundaries if you don't build them deliberately. I'd built mine late, but I'd built them well. By November, the lake cooled again. Mornings frosted the grass. The heron appeared less often, migrating or simply choosing deeper waters. I missed it, not because it symbolized anything, but because its absence reminded me that nothing stays. And that's not a threat. It's a fact. One afternoon, while sorting paperwork I'd avoided for months, I came across the original deed. The first page still bore the date and my signature, steady despite the grief I'd been carrying then. I realized how much that man had trusted the future. He'd been right too, because the future didn't come to take. It came to test. And this time, I didn't shrink. I didn't explain. I didn't barter peace for approval. I lived inside the space I claimed. Still, as winter edged closer again, I felt it. The sense that stories like this don't end with triumph or punishment. They end with choice. And somewhere ahead, another choice was waiting. Not louder, just clearer. And I was ready for it. Winter returned gently, like a familiar guest who no longer needed to announce itself. By December, the lake had settled into a muted stillness. Mornings arrived wrapped in frost, and the air carried that clean sharpness that made every breath feel deliberate. I'd learned to read the weather now. The way the clouds sat low when snow was coming, the way the water darkened before a storm. Life had narrowed again, but this time by choice. I woke early, split wood, cooked simple meals, read more than I had in years. Silence no longer felt like something to fill. It felt complete on its own. Then, quietly, something shifted. It started with a letter. Not from Evan. Not from my sister. No familiar handwriting. Just a clean envelope with a return address from a firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice, a formal one, notice of intent to purchase. I read it twice. Someone, an investment group based in Vancouver, was making inquiries about my property. Not an offer yet, just interest. They claimed to represent a buyer assembling waterfront holdings in the region. They asked whether I consider selling now or in the near future. I set the letter down slowly. At first, I felt nothing. Then I felt something close to irritation. Not because of the money, there was none mentioned yet, but because of the timing. I hadn't listed. I hadn't advertised. I hadn't spoken to anyone, which meant the interest hadn't found me by accident. That night, I pulled out my notebook again. Old habit. I wrote down dates. The mediation meeting, Evan's last letter, the visit where he'd driven past without stopping, the moment I'd taken the cameras down. Patterns don't announce themselves. They reveal themselves when you're patient enough to look. 2 days later, my sister called. "Have you heard from Evan?" she asked cautiously. "No," I replied. "Why?" "He mentioned something," she said, "about investors, about how waterfront property is spiking again." I closed my eyes briefly. What exactly did he say? I asked that if you ever decided to sell, it would be smart to do it soon, she replied, before the market shifts. Did he say this to me? I asked. No, she said. To me? Recently? Yes. That was all I needed to hear. After we hung up, I sat by the window for a long time, watching the lake as the light faded. The surface reflected the sky like a sheet of dull metal. No heron, no boats, just water and cold and time. Evan had learned something from the last confrontation. He wasn't pushing directly anymore. He was circling. The next step wasn't dramatic. It was procedural. I called Andrew the next morning. I received a notice. I told him. An investment firm expressing interest in purchasing my property. Andrew didn't interrupt. I didn't solicit it, I added, and I suspect it's not coincidence. Andrew exhaled slowly. I was wondering when this would happen. So was I replied. He's prohibited from financial dealings related to your property, Andrew said. Directly. Indirectly is murkier, but still risky for him. What do we do? I asked. Nothing, Andrew said. Yet. I frowned. Nothing. Not unless he crosses a clear line, Andrew continued. But we document. We stay alert. And most importantly, you don't engage. I smiled faintly. That part I've learned. The following week, a second letter arrived. Different firm. Similar language. Same vague tone of opportunity. 2 inquiries. Same month. Same timing. I didn't need proof to know what was happening. Evan wasn't trying to take my home anymore. He was trying to tempt me to give it up. And that told me something important. He still believed the cottage was a resource waiting to be optimized. He still didn't understand. On Christmas Eve, my sister visited again. We cooked together, quietly, carefully. No tension, but no pretending either. After dinner, she set her fork down and looked at me. He thinks you'll sell, she said. I won't, I replied. She nodded. I told him that. What did he say? That you're stubborn. I smiled. He's finally right about something. She hesitated, then spoke again. He's trying to rebuild, she said. Not just financially. His sense of self. That's his work, I replied. Not mine. I know, she said. I just wanted you to hear it from me, not from him. I appreciate that, I said. Later that night, after she left, I stood on the deck alone. Snow had begun to fall lightly, dusting the railing, softening the edges of everything. I thought about how close I'd come, months earlier, to losing not just the cottage, but my understanding of myself. I'd mistaken quiet for weakness. Others had too. But quiet, I'd learned, is often the clearest signal of certainty. January arrived with heavy snow and long nights. One afternoon, as I shoveled the path down to the shoreline, I noticed something strange. Footprints. Not mine. Fresh. They stopped near the water. Turned. went back toward the road. I followed them carefully, heart steady, not racing. At the edge of the driveway, the tracks vanished into tire marks. Someone had come and left. I checked with the neighbors later that day. Casually, no one had seen anything unusual. No unfamiliar cars. No disturbances. That night, I slept lightly. Not afraid. Alert. 2 days later, Andrew called. He tried, he said. Tried what? I asked. Filed a third-party inquiry through a shell company. Andrew replied, looking to assess your willingness to sell. I leaned back in the chair. And it violates the spirit of his agreement, Andrew said. Enough that we can warn him formally. Do it, I said. The warning went out the next morning. Clear, cold, legal. Any further attempt to influence, assess, or pressure regarding my property would be treated as a breach of conditions. The response was immediate. Not from Evan. From silence. Weeks passed. No more letters. No more inquiries. No more footprints. Winter deepened, then slowly began to loosen its grip. One morning in late February, I woke to sunlight glinting off the lake, ice retreating again at the edges. The heron returned, standing where it always had, as if nothing had ever interrupted its routine. I watched it for a long time, and I understood something then that I hadn't before. This wasn't a story about family conflict. It wasn't about money. It wasn't even about boundaries. It was about identity. Evan had tried to define me as something convenient. I had refused. And in refusing, I had become something unmistakable, even to myself. As spring edged closer again, I felt no anticipation for what might come next. Because whatever it was, I knew this now. Nothing I valued could be taken without my consent. And nothing I consented to would ever cost me my peace again. Still, stories don't end when the threat disappears. They end when the lesson settles. And mine had finally, fully settled in place. Spring returned the way it always does on the island. Quietly, almost apologetically, as if it knows winter still has a say. The lake loosened day by day, ice pulling back from the shoreline in thin, reluctant sheets. Morning smelled of damp earth and cedar instead of frost. The cottage creaked less at night, settling into warmth again. With the thaw came something else. Relief, not the sharp kind that follows a crisis, but the steady kind that settles in once you realize the ground beneath you isn't going to give way anymore. I stopped expecting interruptions. No more letters from interested parties. No unfamiliar cars slowing near the driveway. No second-guessing whether a knock would come after dark. The warning Andrew sent had done its job. Evan had finally stepped back. Not because he suddenly understood me, but because he understood consequences. And that was enough. In March, Andrew called one last time. Everything's clean, he said. No breaches. No further inquiries. His probation officer confirmed compliance. From a legal standpoint, you're done. Good, I said. You don't sound surprised. I wasn't waiting for relief. I replied. I already had it. He chuckled softly. You know, most people don't realize how rare it is to hold a boundary once pressure shows up. You did. Once I learned how, I said, it stopped being hard. After we hung up, I put the phone down and didn't think about Evan again that day. Or the next. Or the one after that. Life widened again. Slowly, I repaired the last section of fencing near the water. Planted a small garden behind the shed. Nothing ambitious. Herbs. A few vegetables. Things that didn't demand attention, just consistency. Neighbors I'd barely spoken to before started waving more often. One of them, an older man who lived farther up the shore, stopped by one afternoon with a bag of apples from his tree. Figured you might like these, he said. I thanked him, and we stood talking for a few minutes about weather, boats, nothing important. It felt good. Not connection out of obligation. Connection out of choice. In April, my sister visited again. Not unexpectedly. She called first. I was thinking of coming out this weekend. She said, if that's all right. It is, I replied. She arrived with a small overnight bag and no agenda. We walked the shoreline together in the late afternoon, shoes sinking slightly into the softened ground. She watched the water more than she talked. "He's doing better," she said eventually. "I'm glad," I replied. "He's quieter," she continued, less certain of himself. "It's strange to see. Sometimes that's where growth starts," I said. She nodded. "I won't ask you to see him," she said. "I know that door isn't open." "Thank you," I replied. We stopped near the far edge of the property, where the trees thinned and the lake opened up. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly. "Not just for what he did, for how I pushed, for assuming you'd always bend." I looked at her then, really looked. "I let people assume that for a long time," I said. "That part's on me too." She smiled faintly. "Not anymore." That night, after she'd gone to bed, I sat alone on the deck with a blanket around my shoulders, listening to the water move gently against the shore. The heron stood nearby, illuminated by moonlight, perfectly still. I felt no triumph, just balance. By May, the cottage no longer felt like a recovery site. It felt like a life. I hosted a small dinner, nothing elaborate. 2 neighbors, simple food, laughter that didn't echo awkwardly off walls. When everyone left, the silence that returned wasn't empty. It was complete. One afternoon near the end of the month, I found Evan's letters while cleaning out a drawer. The first one defensive, the second fearful, the third clear-eyed. I reread them slowly. Then I did something I hadn't planned. I put them all in the fire, not out of anger, out of finality. Watching the paper curl and darken, I realized something important. Forgiveness isn't an event. It's a decision you make privately for yourself long after the other person stops asking for it. I didn't need to tell Evan anything more. I didn't need to reopen anything. I had already chosen peace. June brought long days and early mornings. I spent more time on the water, sitting near the edge with my coffee, letting the sun climb slowly. The heron remained a near daily presence, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, never concerned with whether I noticed. I took that as instruction. One evening, while watching the sky shift from blue to amber, I thought about how different everything could have been. If I'd said yes out of guilt, if I'd compromised what mattered, if I'd mistaken family pressure for love, I would have lost this. Not the cottage. Myself. That was the real line Evan had crossed, and the one I'd finally redrawn. As summer settled in fully, the story stopped feeling like something I was inside of. It felt finished. Not because everyone was healed, not because relationships were restored, but because the lesson no longer needed repeating. I had learned how to stand still without shrinking, how to say no without explaining, how to protect what took a lifetime to earn. And that knowledge wasn't tied to this place. I carried it with me now. The last evening of June, I stood on the deck as the sun disappeared behind the trees, the lake glowing softly in its wake. The heron lifted off, wings slow and deliberate, crossing the water toward the far shore. I watched until it vanished. Then I went inside, closed the door, let the quiet settle around me, unchallenged, uninterrupted, and fully mine. If my story resonated with you, if you've ever had to defend your peace against the people who thought they had a claim to it, take a moment to reflect on where your own boundaries stand. And if you want to hear more stories about quiet strength, hard choices, and the consequences that follow, stay with the channel and share where you're listening from. Some stories don't shout. They endure.